Lancaster was the hanging capital of England. There's more executions in Lancaster than anywhere else in the country. This is the place that the Pendle Witches and anybody else will be executed.
Would you say that that area is creepy?
Yes, you'll see the atmosphere completely changes. It's quite a dark place. This is the area where the Pendle Witches died and still here today.
So you've got the history of the Pendle Witches, hundreds of executions, and an insane asylum.
Yeah, just a few feet away.
Can you tell us anything about where you're buried?
I'm buried close by.
This is creepier than Pendle Hill.
Yeah, you're there. How do you feel? No. What the f?
22-year-old Tim McLean was on a bus traveling to Winnipeg when a man named Vince Lee boarded. Vince sat next to Tim, but Tim barely acknowledged him and fell asleep. And without warning, Vince brutally attacked Tim McLean. Vince pulled out a big knife and began stabbing Tim in the neck and chest. After the attack began, the bus driver pulled over and him and all the passengers got off. Some people tried to help, but they were chased away by Vince Lee. Vince then decapitated Tim McLean and displayed his severed head to the passengers outside. He then returned to Tim's body and began severing other parts and consuming some of his flesh. Witnesses then saw Vince Lee stabbing and cutting Tim's body and walking around the bus with his head. Vince Lee then attempted to escape the bus by breaking a window but was shot with a taser and was arrested. Parts of Tim's body were then taken off the bus, but Tim's ears, nose, and tongue were found in Vince Lee's pocket. Tim's eyes and heart were never found, and it is assumed Vince ate both of them. This is honestly terrible, and Tim McLean didn't deserve this at all. He was so young, and he had his whole life to live. May he rest in peace.
Remember the show El Chapulín Colorado?
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know what El Chapulín Colorado is, maybe the English speakers.
Yeah, I was about to say people who are not even Mexican either.
It was a show very, very popular back in the day. Featured one of the most famous actors in the Mexican community, which was El Chespirito, Roberto Mario Gomez Bolaños. He also played El Chavo del Ocho, and was just loved, bro. When he passed away, like, a lot of people felt it. And there was this one episode that gave you a weird, creepy, eerie vibe, and specifically affected the people who have a severe fear of clowns. And I think you're afraid of clowns, right?
Kinda, bro. It depends on how they look, not gonna lie.
I'm gonna show you the episode, but a lot of people remember this. It was late at night when they watched this episode, and they thought it was just like kind of a fever dream. They didn't think it was a real life episode,
But it was.
like a little context. Right here, he falls into a hole, but he ends up falling into a different reality, a clown world.
I can see why people say it's a fever dream.
Now imagine being like 5 and watching this in the middle of the night.
Oh my. What the fuck? I can see why that probably scared some kids, or maybe it started their fear of clowns.
Mother of 4 locked her children in her house to burn to death in London. Deveka Rose lived in the Sutton area of South London and was a mother to 4 adorable little boys. These were twin brothers Leighton and Logan, aged 3, and Kyson and Bryson, aged 4. On the 18th of December 2021, Deveka locked the little boys in the house while she went alone shopping. Just after 7 p.m. that day, a concerned member of the public walked past the house and noticed what looked like a fire. The person then knocked on the neighbour's door and alerted them, and the neighbour started to try and kick the door down. The neighbour seemingly knew that the little boys would be in there alone. The blaze reportedly started on the ground floor from either a candle or a lit cigarette. Due to the state of the property and the fact that there was rubbish and stuff all over the floor that was extremely flammable, the fire was then able to spread rapidly. The 4 children reportedly tried to escape up the stairs and to the top floor of the house and call for help. Tragically, their efforts were in vain. When firefighters got to the property, they found all of the children on the floor. Horrifically, they'd all passed away from smoke inhalation. Now, when she was interviewed, Deveka apparently tried to tell police a story about how she'd left the boys in the hands of someone called Jade. However, she wasn't really able to provide police with any information about this Jade, and when she tried to ring Jade's number, it seemed suspiciously like her own telephone number, and they couldn't get through. Police were also unable to trace this mystery Jade. CCTV also captured Deveka leaving the children alone in the house just the day prior. It was clear to police this was not a one-off. She was known to social workers for months prior to the tragedy, and frustratingly, it seemed as though social workers had tried to engage with her, but she'd refused, so they just kind of closed the case. She's now been convicted of manslaughter and is awaiting sentencing. Let me know what you think of this case. Should social workers just close a file if a parent refuses to engage with them? Also, let me know what you think her sentence should be.
There be a serial killer in Indianapolis. Fears in the community are growing as these two women were recently found murdered in the exact same way, days apart, and just 150 yards from each other on the same street. This is everything we know so far. On January 27th, 58-year-old Shannon Lassier was found dead outside of a dentist office on North Midford Road in Indianapolis. According to her son, just the night before, Shannon had actually gone out for an evening walk, but she never made it back home. Police have not publicly confirmed her cause of death, but her son has come forward and stated that she was brutally stabbed to death. Just 5 days later, on February 1st, 52-year-old Marianne Weiss was also found murdered, this time behind a nearby strip mall, just 150 yards from where Shannon was found. To kind of put it in perspective, the location of where each victim was found is only about a 3-minute walk from each other. Just like with Shannon, police have not publicly confirmed Marianne's cause of death, but they did say that there were major similarities in these two cases, with the biggest similarity being that they were killed in the exact same manner. And with Shannon's son already confirming that she was stabbed to death, and with the police's comments, I can only guess that Marianne was also stabbed to death. The other eerie similarities in these murders is the fact that they both occurred within days of each other. Both victims were white women in their 50s. Both were found between the 2100 and 2200 block of North Midford Road, and they each had ties to the Far East Side. At the moment, Indiana police aren't sure if the two cases are connected, as there's no concrete evidence tying the two together, but they are urging the public to stay vigilant and aware of their surroundings. And they're also warning residents to travel in pairs and to not go out alone. Police haven't released much more information other than this, as they're trying to protect the investigation, so they haven't confirmed whether or not they have any suspects. But residents in the community, and especially those that live on that road, are starting to wonder if there's a possible serial killer because of how eerily similar the two cases are. And they're terrified, rightfully so. The Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department is working with a local forensics agency to see if there's any meaningful forensic evidence that can be pulled from the scene. And as part of the investigation, they're working with multiple different units. They plan to increase patrols in the area where the murders took place, in cars and on foot. And they're asking members of the community to review home security footage and to report any suspicious behavior. It might be too soon to tell if there's an actual serial killer behind these murders, but as a precaution, anyone in the area, please stay safe and only go out if you have to.
Choke of death. So this happened in the UK, Essex. 39 people ended up dying.
39?
They were all expecting to get to a better spot. They wanted to go from Vietnam to UK. They were in there for more than 12 hours, bro. Without getting out, without getting a breath of fresh air, nothing, bro. And keep in mind, whenever you're in a confined space, without air circulation, bro, and keep in mind there was a lot of people too, oxygen starts depleting, OD, more CO2 starts coming out. Plus the temperature was rising in there. In the UK, they got picked up by this guy, Maurice Robinson. When he picked them up, they were fine, right? Well, that's what he thought. He ended up pulling to the side of the road because his boss texted him, yo, let them out for some fresh air.
After hours?
He ends up opening the door.
And they're all dead?
All of them. They had like red marks on them. He ended up calling the cops.
Hello, caller. Is patient breathing?
Hello, no, I'm a lorry driver and I just lifted a trailer from the port.
Okay, are they breathing?
I don't think so.
How many approximately?
The trailer's jammed. I don't know.
Tell me approximately how many patients?
25.
And it's also sad because in between, while everything was happening, there's also messages of a young girl, and there's texts that say, I'm sorry, Mom. My path to abroad doesn't succeed. Mom, I love you so much. I'm dying because I can't breathe.
What?
I'm sorry, Mom. And then some other guy said as well, I cannot breathe. I'm sorry.
One employee killed another employee execution style down in the tunnels, and then he came over here to the power plant and he shot himself at the base of the stairs. I promised Colin to show him the saddest room on the sanatorium.
So this is all stuff from actual patients.
85 to 90% of the people that were here involuntarily, and they didn't want to be here. Being up here by yourself is terrifying.
Something in the hindbrain is screaming, do not go in that building. Don't go in that tunnel. The heebie-jeebie factor is just off the charts.
We're at the scariest place in America, the Indiana State Sanatorium.
One just went up. Down here. Girl, dude. This room is draining everything.
Are you like trying to close the curtain?
Are you filming this?
Yeah. Dude, hold behind you, dude.
What? Look at
that's crazy.
So he's dying. Anybody?
Now that's definitely a hot spot,
Dude,
is it not?
Dude, it looks like a person. Oh, the bear fell off.
Okay.
You must leave.
Apologize now. Here. God, what the?
He died and then cooked himself in a hot room, and it says when they came to get him away, the meat just came off the bones.
This is the worst botched execution of all time, and you won't believe how disturbing it actually is. This electric chair execution that I'm about to explain went disturbingly wrong in so many ways. And to make it worse, the prisoner was only 14 years old. In 1944, George Stinney was thrown on trial for the murder of 2 girls in South Carolina. The only circumstantial evidence was that he was the last one seen with the girls alive. They had reportedly asked him where they could find passion flowers. There is no denying that the color of his skin played a huge factor, and it took an all-white jury less than 10 minutes to find him guilty. On June 16, 1944, George was ushered into his death chamber. The young boy only weighed 95 pounds, which was apparent by how baggy his striped jumpsuit was. His legs were too thin for the electrodes to fit, and the electric chair looked giant in comparison, and his feet didn't even touch the ground. Finally, the adult-sized mask was placed over his petite face, was clearly not going to stay put, and when asked if he had any last words, his voice quivered and cracked, and all he said was "no, sir." When the switch was flipped to begin the execution, his small body shook violently. This dislodged the mask, revealing his tear-drenched, pain-riddled face and wide blood-red eyes. He smoked and burned and writhed, filling the chamber with a pungent stench of cooking flesh. After the first round, George still wasn't dead. Another round was administered, causing his face to contort further. His eyes bulged, and it almost looked as if he was sizzling. But he was still breathing. Finally, after the third round, George was pronounced dead. But the largest mishap of all wasn't revealed until decades later, when his guilty verdict was overturned. This is just insane to wrap your head around, and this literally happened less than 100 years ago.
I'm calling what this influencer did one of the sickest scams America's ever seen. Amanda Riley was nicknamed Scamanda when the truth was revealed about how she lied about one of the most serious things you could lie about. So let's rewind to 2012 when she first started blogging. We need to ravel what on earth went on and who knew about this sickening scam. Amanda initially started blogging to document her so-called struggle with Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was a devout Christian and had 2 children, so her story understandably broke the hearts of many. She started posting photos and paragraphs about her health battles. Soon her generous followers started sending in donations to help towards the payment for her medical bills. They were desperate to try and help this mother and obviously contribute towards helping her family too. It was a staggering 7 years later that an anonymous tip came in to a journalist, which sparked an investigation into what was really going on behind the scenes. What transpired shocked the world. It turned out Amanda had shaved her own head to fake going through chemo. She never had cancer at all. She used the fake illness to collect over $100,000 from charitable strangers who believed they were giving to a good cause. She'd gone as far as to fake medical records and take photos in hospital to keep up the illusion that she was really battling with the illness. She would show up to the hospital, say that she felt ill and faint, and she would then get put on a drip and use the opportunity to take loads of selfies for her blog. Lovely donators had commented things on her blog such as, "You're a testimony to the amazing God we serve," and calling her a fighter and inspirational. In 2020, she pleaded guilty to wire fraud and was given 5 years in prison. She was ordered to pay back over $100,000 that she'd stole off people online effectively. Now, some believe that her husband Corey did know about this whole scam. However, some believe that he was just an innocent party in this and was also conned by Amanda. The children are currently being looked after by Corey in Texas while Amanda remains behind bars. Let me know what you think in the comments. Should she have been put in prison for this? And do you think her husband knew?
This is the haunting last footage of Kyler Effinger, who died a few weeks ago after crawling into a plane's engine at the Salt Lake City International Airport. On January 1st, 30-year-old Kyler went to the airport to board a flight to Denver to visit his sick grandpa. But as he was checking in, there was a problem with security, which caused him to miss his flight. As you can see in the video, this caused Kyler to become really upset, and he then began using his shoe to try and break one of the airport's windows. After unsuccessfully trying to open multiple locked doors, Kyler then ran to the south end of the airport and managed to kick open a terminal's emergency exit door, which opened up to a stairwell. He's then seen running onto the tarmac as a plane is starting to take off. This all happened at around 10 p.m. that night, and as a result, a store manager inside the airport who witnessed the disturbance called the Salt Lake City police. When authorities arrived, they were given a description of the man and began to search for him, and they eventually found some of the man's clothing and shoes on one of the airport's runways. About 10 minutes into the search, Kyler was spotted at one of the airport's de-icing pads, and he was then seen going underneath the moving plane and into its engine. The plane that was moving was on its way to San Francisco. It was flight number 2348 and it carried 95 passengers. The passengers became terrified as the plane came to a halt and as police sped down the tarmac surrounding the plane. According to some of the passengers, the pilot came on the intercom and said that there was a security event and that the man police were looking for was surrounding them. Authorities asked air traffic controllers to tell the pilot to turn off the plane's engines, but unfortunately, it was too late. Police found Kyler unconscious, partially inside one of the plane's wing-mounted engines, which, although it was turned off, it was still rotating. Authorities began CPR and administered naloxone, but sadly, Kyler was pronounced dead at the scene. And unfortunately, some passengers on the plane witnessed the entire thing. An autopsy will be conducted to determine Kyler's cause and manner of death, and the Salt Lake City Police as well as the FAA are still investigating the incident. But according to Kyler's family, his most likely cause of death was due to head trauma, which reportedly happened very fast. Kyler struggled with mental health for nearly a decade after being bullied all throughout school and into college, and he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when he was 20 years old. Kyler's family believes that he was suffering from a mental health episode that night stemming from missing his flight, which likely sent him into a manic episode resulting in his death. Kyler reportedly called his dad after he missed his flight and was trying to rebook, but according to his dad, just by talking to him on the phone, he knew it wasn't going to end well. He just never thought that this would be the outcome. Kyler lived in Park City, Utah, and was described as having the world's biggest heart. His parents are now wanting to try and use this horrific situation to help others struggling with mental health.
This paranormal investigator, his name is Antonio Zamudio, and the story began with this 11-year-old boy. His name was Augusto. He ends up buying this doll at a garage sale, not knowing that it was obviously possessed and stuff, but
Dude, I think I've seen this before, bro.
It has long hands and long arms.
That's it? That's the real doll?
Yes. And he brings it back to the house, and that's when all the paranormal stuff starts happening. But it's not as your typical
open door,
things being flown around. It's more of the mom and the dad hearing voices in the middle of the night. They hear him always talking to the doll. Him waking up at 3 a.m. just to go to the living room and turn on the TV. She's noticing all this weird behavior, and then she just has enough. So she's like, you know what? This doll is ugly, it's dirty, I'm just gonna get rid of it. So without telling Augusto,
gets rid of it.
And then 3 days later, it ends up reappearing at the edge of the bed of Augusto. That's when she calls Antonio. Antonio gets there. He starts setting up static cameras around. Nothing really happens until Augusto goes to sleep in his room. And he captures on camera the doll literally running to Augusto's room. Like,
doll moved?
Yes. There's the doll right there. Okay? Bro, it gets up and runs.
Yo, what if you see that, bro? Nah.
I'm gonna try to burn it or something. I don't know.
First of all, why would the kid like the doll, bro? It looks scary.
And shout out to Podcast Paranormal.
This is by far one of the worst true crime cases I ever explained, so this is a massive trigger warning. In 2007, the boy on the right named Gabriel Kuhn, who was 12 years old, was killed by Daniel Petrie, who was 16, and on the left. Daniel Petrie and Gabriel Kuhn became good friends and began playing an online role-playing game called Tibia. At one point of the game, Gabriel asked Daniel for 20,000 virtual cash to clear the stage. Gabriel borrowed money from Daniel to use in the game and then refused to pay him back. Gabriel then blocked Daniel on everything, and this made him furious, and he went to Gabriel's house to pay him a visit. A couple of days before the murder, Daniel called the home phone of Gabriel, and his mom answered. She explained that she would be out of town and that her son would be home alone if they wanted to play, completely unaware of the boys falling out. And on August 23rd, 2007, Daniel went to Gabriel's house and knocked on the door. Nobody answered, and Daniel kept knocking, but eventually Gabriel started speaking to Daniel through the door. Daniel told Gabriel to unlock the door and let him in, and if he apologized to him, everything would be fine. Believing this, Gabriel unlocked the door and let Daniel in. And after entering the house, Daniel locked the door behind him. Daniel then brutally assaulted Gabriel. Gabriel tried his best to defend himself, but he failed to do so. Daniel was older, bigger, and stronger. Gabriel was dripping in blood after being brutally beaten by Daniel. Daniel then laughed at the terrified Gabriel and took him to the bedroom, where he then sexually assaulted him. Gabriel cried, but this made Daniel even more cruel. After all of this, Gabriel threatened Daniel, saying he will tell his mother everything that happened, but this only made Daniel more mad. And in a fit of rage, Daniel took a cord from a gaming console and wrapped it around Gabriel's neck and strangled him with it until he went limp. Daniel assumed Gabriel was dead, and believing this, Daniel tried to move and hide the body in the crawlspace leading to the bedrooms. However, the body was too heavy, and after realizing this, Daniel searched the house for sharp tools, and eventually he found a kitchen knife and a hacksaw. Daniel then returned to Gabriel's body, and in order to make it lighter, he took the knife and hacksaw and began cutting at the top of Daniel's leg to remove it, and as Daniel cut into Gabriel's leg, he woke up. Gabriel wasn't dead. He let out a blood-curdling scream, but Daniel restrained him, making sure to twist and turn the blade to make it even more painful. Eventually, Daniel dismembered his right leg and moved to his left. And after severing both of his legs, Gabriel passed away. His autopsy suggested he was still alive throughout the whole ordeal, and he eventually died from shock and blood loss. After Daniel finished the dismemberment, he tried to hide the body again, and he wrapped a cable and wire around Gabriel's body. But the body was still too heavy, and Daniel then fled the house. Gabriel's body was discovered by his brother, and the body was left by the hallway door and the legs and the hacksaw too. Daniel Petrie was admitted to a juvenile center in September 2007 to only 3 years. This is due to Brazil's laws of sentencing minors. And to make you realize how evil Daniel was, when the judge asked him if he had any last words of remorse, Daniel said this: "Gabriel was a coward and a thief. He burns in hell right now where I sent him. And when I die, I will find him in hell and finish my revenge." It's also worth saying that the photos of the crime and Gabriel's body have surfaced on the internet, and nobody knows how they got there. I highly recommend not to look at them due to the graphic nature of them, and they will definitely be the worst crime scene photos you will ever see. It's honestly insane how Daniel is walking free today. May Gabriel rest in peace.
Let's talk about that P. Diddy leaked video that started this whole thing unraveling. And trigger warning, this is incredibly disturbing. If you don't already know, stunning and talented Cassie Ventura met P. Diddy when she was just 19 years old. Now, he was 37 at the time, and he signed her to his record label, Bad Boy Records. There was clearly a power dynamic at play, with him being obviously much older and also virtually in charge of her music career. He reportedly pursued her for years despite the fact that she had a boyfriend. In official documents, Cassie alleges that he forcibly kissed her at her 21st birthday party and caused her to run off crying. The first time they were intimate together, she claims that he plied her with copious amounts of alcohol and substances. Ultimately, they ended up in a relationship together, going public in 2012. They broke up officially in 2018. On the 16th of November 2023, we had an explosive lawsuit filed against P. Diddy by Cassie. It documented some truly horrific details. She stated that the rapper beat her, kicked her, AR'd her, and forced her into intimate acts with S-workers that he'd hired. She stated that he did this, watched and filmed. She also stated he was extremely controlling, not only to herself but also to her friends. She claims that he intimidated her, and when she tried to leave the relationship, he AR'd her. He even allegedly had control over her medical records, and when she had a head injury, she needed an MRI scan. She went to the hospital, got the scan, and they actually sent the results to him, not her. In one incident, it's claimed that after an after party with Jay-Z, Diddy attacked Cassie and threw her out of a car. In another incident, she alleges that he stamped on her head in front of security staff who tried to intervene. She said the assault was so violent she was profusely bleeding and threw up. Cassie reports that the rapper's staff not only were aware of all of this abuse, but they also allowed it to be covered up. She said that they were complicit in this by doing things such as keeping her in hotel rooms until her injuries had healed. Now, Cassie alleges that P. Diddy forced her to be involved in what he nicknamed freak-offs. These were essentially parties where he hired S-workers to perform S-acts with her. She states that he would force her to pour excess amounts of oil over her body. She also claims he forced her to take substances. In official documents, she alleges that he would intimidate her friends too, and on one occasion even dangled one of them over a 17th floor balcony by her ankles. Obviously, for legal reasons, I have to say alleged abuse in all of these claims. However, we did see an absolutely shocking video of him beating and kicking her while she's on the ground, posted by CNN earlier this year. The incident took place in 2016. He'd actually previously denied the allegations, but obviously when faced with video evidence, had to apologise. There's more explosive allegations from this lawsuit in my next video, including a blown-up car.
This pedophile committed a crime so disturbing that a petition was created that asked the government to publicly hang him. And the petition gathered thousands of signatures. This is 33-year-old Benjamin Taylor from West Virginia. And in 2016, he would commit one of the most sickening crimes I've ever read about. Back in 2016, Benjamin was living with his girlfriend, a woman named Amanda Adkins. At the time, Amanda had recently given birth only 9 months ago to her baby daughter, Emily. Emily was a beautiful young girl, and I want to warn you all right now, the details that we're about to discuss are some of the most disturbing I've ever covered. So in October of 2016, Benjamin had only been living with his girlfriend Amanda for about a month. And on the morning of Emily's death at around 4:30 a.m., Amanda woke up and went downstairs to search for her baby. When she went downstairs, she saw Benjamin Taylor with his pants unzipped sitting in the dark. Amanda then noticed that her 9-month-old daughter's limp body was lying nearby on a pile of sheets and laundry. Amanda screamed at Benjamin and grabbed her daughter's lifeless body, but he remained silent and stared at the ground. The details of what had just happened down there are disturbing. Local authorities would call this the worst assault that they had seen in decades. You see, Benjamin and Emily were covered in the infant's blood. After the child's body was examined, the authorities were able to determine that she had been assaulted by an adult male multiple times. The infant child was also bleeding extensively and had suffered head trauma. Emily had a fractured skull and brain hemorrhaging. Authorities believe that Emily may have been shaken violently, or even thrown to the ground or slammed against a hard object. When police arrived at the scene, Benjamin Taylor was observed trying to wipe something off of his groin. That was eventually determined to be Emily's blood. He also told authorities that he remembered taking the baby to the basement, but that he blacked out after that. You see, he had been smoking and drinking the night before, and that was his excuse. Thankfully, Benjamin was convicted of all charges and sentenced to life in prison without mercy, as you can see right here. But for some people, that just wasn't enough. And like I said at the beginning of this video, a petition was created which asked the government to publicly hang Benjamin. And this petition, before it was shut down, gathered over 50,000 signatures. I mean, this truly is one of the worst things that I've ever covered here on my TikTok. And personally, I don't think that life in prison is enough for this guy. I mean, the pain that poor Emily went through before she was eventually killed is just heartbreaking on every single level. And I just hope and pray that the other prisoners that are in there with Benjamin find out or already have found out exactly what he did to land himself in there. If you want to hear more true crime stories, listen to the podcast Murder in America that I co-host with my wife, Courtney. It's available on all streaming platforms.
I really have no words for this. Joseph Fritzl, the man who imprisoned his own daughter for 24 years, repeatedly sexually assaulted her, and had 7 children with her, is being released to a regular prison. This is a big deal for many reasons, and it's really scary. So for the past 15 years, Joseph has been in a high security unit for mentally disturbed patients at Stein Prison in Krems, Austria. This is because in 2008, it was discovered that he had been holding his daughter Elizabeth captive in a makeshift prison chamber in the basement of the family home. I'll go more into detail detail about what took place in just a second. But basically, in 1984, when Elizabeth was 18 years old, her dad Joseph lured her into the basement of their Amstetten home and into a soundproof bunker that he built. Over the next 24 years, he would repeatedly sexually assault her, resulting in him fathering 7 children with her. This would all come to light in 2008 when one of their babies became sick and needed urgent medical attention. When he took the baby to the hospital, the doctor became suspicious and alerted authorities, who then asked for the baby's mom to come forward. So Joseph released Elizabeth from the bunker, and she was then able to tell authorities how she'd been held captive for the past 24 years, and Joseph was ultimately arrested. At the time of her rescue, Elizabeth was 42 years old. Joseph was sentenced in 2009 to life in prison after being convicted of incest, 3,000 instances of sexual assault, false imprisonment, negligent homicide of one of the children, and a bunch of other charges. After a psychological evaluation deemed him extremely psychologically abnormal, he was then transferred to spend his sentence in that high-security unit for mentally disturbed patients in Krem. It's now been 15 years, and after a recent psychiatric assessment, he was granted release to a regular prison. The verdict was based on the fact that he's now 88 years old and reportedly has dementia and no longer poses a danger to society. As a condition, he will need to attend regular psychotherapy every 3 months over the next 10 years as part of a probation period. But this is a big deal for many reasons, and it's incredibly alarming. His lawyer, Astrid Wagner, is actually pushing for his release to be into a nursing home and not a regular prison. She's working on his early release into the public as we speak. According to Austrian law, those who are sentenced to life in prison are potentially eligible for parole after 15 years. And in Joseph's case, that would be March of this year. His lawyer Astrid just stated, quote, "He regrets what he did and he was actually close to tears. Based on Joseph's recent evaluation, I wouldn't be frightened to move in with him in a flat share arrangement. He no longer poses a sex drive." End quote. Just her statement alone is disgusting. And I know he's 88 now and has dementia, but let me tell you why this is so alarming. As I explained earlier, that day in 1984, he lured his daughter Elizabeth into the basement of the family home under the pretense that he needed help installing a door. Unknown to Elizabeth, he had built a makeshift prison chamber in the style of a Cold War bunker, and once she helped him install the door, he rendered her unconscious and locked her inside. What's absolutely crazy about this case is that Joseph lived with his wife and other children upstairs, and they were all reportedly unaware of the horrors taking place in the basement. A little while after Elizabeth disappeared, her mom filed a missing persons report, but Joseph told friends, family, and the police that she ran away to join a cult. He would then force Elizabeth to write letters from the basement telling everyone that she was okay and not to look for her. Over the next 24 years, he repeatedly sexually assaulted her, which resulted in him fathering 7 children with her, 3 of which he also held in captivity with Elizabeth, while the others he brought upstairs to raise with his wife and other children. One of the children held in captivity with Elizabeth died shortly after birth because Joseph failed to get them medical attention. That baby was cremated by Joseph. Joseph told his wife that the 3 children he brought up just so happened to be placed on their doorstep. After he was arrested, Joseph initially told police that what he did to Elizabeth was consensual, not sexual assault. But then he stated that he always knew it wasn't right, it just became normal. But despite that, he said that he always treated Elizabeth and the kids in captivity well by bringing them flowers and toys. He also initially stated that he felt compelled to imprison Elizabeth because she wouldn't follow the rules, but he ultimately admitted to locking her up for his own gratification. He went on to say, quote, "I was born to RAPE. I held myself back for a very long time. I could have behaved a lot worse than locking up my daughter." End quote. Joseph also admitted to locking his own mother in the attic of that same family home. He boarded up all of the windows and told neighbors that his mom had died, but in reality, she was likely locked in that attic for nearly 20 years until her death in 1980. If all of this is not alarming enough, Joseph also had an extensive criminal history prior to this. In 1967, Joseph broke into the home of a 24-year-old nurse and sexually assaulted her while holding a knife up to her throat, threatening to kill her if she screamed. He only served 1 year in prison for that crime and had his criminal history expunged after 15 years due to Austrian law. Adding to this, Joseph is also suspected of several murders. The first is the murder of 17-year-old Martina Claudia Posch, who disappeared on November 12, 1986. Her body was found 10 days later in a lake, and her cause of death was strangulation. At the time of her murder, Joseph ran a guest house near where her body was found, and she really resembled his daughter Elizabeth. He's also suspected of murdering 17-year-old Anna Newmayer, who was killed on August 17, 1966. She disappeared within 20 miles of where Joseph worked at the time. Then there's the murder of 42-year-old Gabriela Supkova, who was killed in 2007. Her body was found in the exact same location where Joseph was conveniently on vacation. Although he's suspected of these murders, he's never been formally charged due to lack of evidence. So, like I said, I know he's old now and has dementia, but Joseph is an evil person, and I personally don't think he should ever be released back into society. And I can't believe that this is even a thing with everything that he's done. What are your thoughts on this?
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
This is what would happen if you ate dry ice, and it wouldn't be good at all. Okay, so you very well could have eaten dry ice before, in a cocktail or ice cream, but that's in extremely small doses. The real thing is negative 109 degrees Fahrenheit, which means as soon as you eat it, you will feel a cooling sensation all around your mouth. Your tongue and mouth will be frozen in a matter of seconds, which wouldn't be fun. And your teeth will feel extremely awful. Just imagine biting into the coldest ice cream bar imaginable. And if you kept it in there longer, you will eventually get frostbite. But if you swallow the dry ice, that's where the real problems begin. It will then land in your stomach, and if you eat enough of it, you will have a very, very sharp pain. And the craziest thing is, you will actually get frostbite on your stomach lining. And the more and more you eat, it will start to turn into gas, which would result in you burping up freezing gas. And eventually, after some time, your stomach will explode. So whatever you do, never eat dry ice unless you want your mouth looking like this and your stomach exploding.
So this week it came out that Kristin Chenoweth was almost a victim of the Girl Scout murders. This is going to be part of a new series called Close Encounters about people who narrowly escaped a horrible fate, so follow along for more. Some quick backstory is in 1977, 3 girls were found murdered on their first night at Girl Scout camp in Oklahoma. They were all staying in a tent together, and their bodies were found on the trail leading to the camp showers. Now, in 1977, there was no way to test for DNA evidence, but a local man, Gene Leroy Hart, had actually escaped prison and was on the run. He was arrested for the murders, but was acquitted by a jury. There was actually a note found on the campgrounds 2 months earlier that said, "We are on a mission to kill 3 girls in Tent 1, but that note was discarded by the camp director, thinking it was a prank. Now, Broadway actress Kristin Chenoweth was actually supposed to be on that trip. She fell ill that weekend and was unable to go, but she says that it's haunted her entire life. So it wasn't until this year, 45 years after the murders took place, that we might finally have enough DNA evidence to convict Gene Leroy Hart. He passed away in 1979, but this might at least give some closure to the families. Hulu just released a documentary called Keeper of the Ashes about this entire event. Let me know if you're going to watch this weekend.
Conducted inhumane medical experiments without limits in the concentration camps of Auschwitz. I am Josef Mengele, a German doctor and SS officer in 1943. I was supposed to be responsible for selecting detainees upon their arrival. I was so cruel that no selection took place. I sent them all to the gas chamber. During this time, I carried out increasingly bizarre experiments, particularly on twins due to my obsession with human genetics. I subjected prisoners to organ extractions, injections of toxic substances, unnecessary surgeries, and other medical tortures, all without anesthesia, only for my personal medical experimentation. I even attempted to alter the genetics of patients to fit the criteria of my SS officer ideologies. I also performed numerous involuntary sterilizations, using methods that caused suffering to prisoners due to the infections they provoked. The human experiments I conducted at Auschwitz represent one of the darkest chapters in the history of medicine. Despite this, I was never convicted for these acts because I fled to South America for many years. I died of a heart attack in 1979 in Brazil, never having been judged for my crimes.
This is what would happen if you were the only person on Earth. Up first, if you were the only person on Earth, you can do and go anywhere you virtually want. Which would be awesome, but you should be way more concerned about your survival. You have to be extremely careful when you want to seek shelter, because cities will be extremely dangerous. And without proper maintenance, they will start to fall apart pretty quickly, and you can even run into dangerous insects and animals. Next, if you wanted to go to the country, even that isn't safe. 400 nuclear power plants will begin to fail and explode. causing hundreds of nuclear explosions, which wouldn't be good at all. Now, when it comes to food, supermarkets are the place to go. They have enough canned foods there to last you decades. But if eating natural is more your style, you might have to hunt like they did back in the old days. Finally, for water, you will have thousands of liters to go through. This is from all the bottles of water at different stores and places. But eventually, you will have to learn how to purify your own water, which really isn't hard at all. So all in all, if you play your cards right, you can easily survive being the only person on Earth.
TikToker faked having cancer in order to trick people out of money via a fundraising page. A TikToker from Iowa called Madison Russo was arrested in January this year after faking having pancreatic cancer. She did this in October 2022 when she was a university student. She claimed on social media that she had been diagnosed with the life-threatening condition. Initially, people believed her, but then medical professionals came forward to cast doubt over her claims. They stated that there were medical discrepancies in her story. Police then actually got involved and looked at her medical records, which confirmed that she had never been diagnosed with cancer. She was charged with theft by means of deception for using the fake illness to raise nearly $38,000 from kind donors online. She had set up a GoFundMe in order to obtain money and has now been ordered to pay restitution. She was recently given a 10-year suspended sentence, and the judge ordered her to pay the restitution and over $1,000 fine. She will also have to complete 100 hours of community service. The judge stated that she had taken part in a criminal scheme and that serious crimes must have serious consequences. The judge stated that she had deceived friends, family, her community, other cancer victims, charities, and strangers.
These are scary videos you should never watch at night. Okay, so the video I'm about to show you shows a kid who was home alone one night when something or somebody started knocking on his door saying it was his mother. But the thing is, his mom wasn't even home because she was working the night shift. And the way it's knocking and sounding make it sound so demonic. Let me know what you think this is because it's absolutely disturbing.
Gabe? Gabe? It's your mom. You should come out. You've been in there for so long. Gabe? Come out. Gabe? Gabe, it's your mother. You should come out.
Then what's your name then?
I simulated my own abduction to obtain $30,000 from the Kidnapped Victims Fund. My name is Sherry Papini. I am a mother of 2 children, and on November 2nd, 2016, I was reported missing by my husband, Keith Papini. I had gone for a morning jog and did not return. Authorities quickly initiated a search to find me. About 3 weeks later, on November 24th, 2016, I was found near a highway in Woodland, California, approximately 240 kilometers from where I had disappeared. I was injured and bound with chains. The precise details of what happened during my disappearance remained unclear and gave rise to much speculation. I told investigators that I had been abducted by 2 masked Hispanic women who allegedly beat and mistreated me during my captivity. I claimed to have been released by my captors and left on the side of the road. Authorities conducted a thorough investigation into the case, but obviously found nothing. I received over $30,000 from the Kidnapped Victims Fund and, according to some sources, possibly an additional $127,567 from Social Security. Subsequently, authorities uncovered the deception, leading to my conviction and imprisonment in a federal institution in 2022.
Have you heard of the singer who narrowly escaped Ted Bundy? This is part of a series called Close Encounters, people who just barely escaped a terrible fate, so follow along for more. So Debbie Harry is the iconic singer from the band Blondie, and one night in 1970, before she was even famous, she was out late at night walking by herself in Manhattan. And that's when she was approached by an attractive man in a white Volkswagen Beetle. Sound familiar? She said she got a bad feeling from the man and said no, but he was pretty persistent. And she had been walking a while and her feet were hurting and she was tired, so eventually she kind of just gave in and got in the car. She quickly realized that something was not right with this car. The backseat had no window cranks and no handles, like there was no way for her to get out of the car. She starts panicking, but she has the wherewithal to reach her arm out of the open window and open the car door from the outside. But the man driving sees her do this, so he speeds up and takes a really sharp corner, throwing her out of the car onto the street. Years later, during the Ted Bundy trial, Debbie Harry was watching TV and immediately recognized him. Some people are skeptical and say that Ted Bundy might have been in Florida when Debbie reported seeing him, but all of these years, Debbie has remained steadfast in the fact that it was definitely him that picked her up, and all of the details she has noted about the car have been spot on. Bundy went on to confess to the murder of 30 women, but a lot of people think that number is a lot higher. So thank God she got out of that car.
This is the unsolved murder of Anton Jermaine Hyman. Anton was described by his mother Vanessa as a happy boy, well liked by the girls and a proper Jack the Lad. He liked basketball, music, his moped, and was also into plaiting and cutting hair. He was also a doting big brother to his little sister. On March 20th, 2004, Anton said bye to his mum and left the house. He was seen by witnesses buying a Mother's Day card and then getting into a taxi outside KFC by himself. Anton's body was discovered by a passerby around 11 AM on March 21st, 2004. He was lying face down in the River Brent. He'd been stabbed, shot and beaten. Forensic examinations showed that he'd been shot with a homemade .22 caliber bullet and stabbed with a 4.5-inch knife. A call to Anton's phone had also been answered after the time that police believe he died, but they've been unable to trace whoever answered that call. Anton's family over the years have put out multiple appeals for information and even offered £20,000 as a reward for any information that leads to the killer being found. Anton's mother believes there's a fear factor around his death and anyone coming forward. She said that his death was brutal and nobody would want to hold their hands up to doing that or to even knowing about it. Police believe he was killed the evening of the 20th of March 2004. He was captured on CCTV around 8 PM between Greenford Avenue and Brent Valley Park in Hanwell. It's now 9 years on from this murder and somebody out there must know something. There's been multiple arrests since Anton's death, but everyone's been released without charge and the police are no closer to finding out what happened to Anton.
These are scary games to play in real life, part 2. This game is called Concentrate, and it's an extremely disturbing game that tells the players how they're going to die. To start the game, the person playing sits down on the ground with their eyes closed, and someone then sits behind them. Then the person behind will start lightly tapping on the player's back while saying, "Concentrate, concentrate, people are dying, children are crying, concentrate, concentrate." Now tap on their head and say, "You just got hit with a hammer." Then poke both sides of their body and say, "You just got stabbed." Now grab their neck and swing them back and forth and say, "You just got hung." Finally, whisper in their ear saying, "You're standing on the edge of a building. You're feeling dizzy and suddenly somebody pushes you." Now tell the person to open their eyes and ask them what color did they see when their eyes were closed. And whatever color they saw will reveal how they will die. Red means you're going to get stabbed, blue means you are going to drown, yellow means you would die by poison, orange means you would die by fire, green means you would die from a great height, purple is suffocation, brown is buried alive, gray is dying from a disease in the hospital, white means you would die from old age and go to heaven, and black means you would die of old age and go to hell.
One of Leonardo DiCaprio and Tobey Maguire's first agents was a pedophile. This is an extremely disturbing story. So I can't find any real photos online of this guy. I don't know if he's wiped it off the face of the internet, but his name was Robert David Villard, or Bob Villard. He was an acting coach for young and aspiring actors, and he represented a number of the clients that he coached as well. So in 2004, a 17-year-old boy reported to the police that Bob had molested him when he was only 13. Bob pled no contest to the charges, validated the kid's story, and basically tried to put the whole thing behind him, but the internet would never let this story die. That is because he was one of Leonardo DiCaprio's first talent agents, and he took a number of pictures of him, including this picture right here, and even this picture. Now apparently he represented him for a good while because these are all photos that Bob took of Leo DiCaprio. And since Bob was an agent that represented a bunch of different children, only God knows how many kids he managed to victimize, or how many kids he victimized that stayed silent. So I'm looking at newspapers.com right now. Now this is interesting. This is something that I never found. I should say this is something that I never found talked about in any of these articles, but I think this is the same guy, Robert David Villard. He's right here in a newspaper in 1987. So this was over 15 years before he was charged with actually touching a child. He was caught in a CP sting. I'm finding this out right now for the first time on newspapers.com. Check this out. This is an actual old article. So this is a whole old article from 1987. Look who else is here. Robert David Villard, 40, an agent for child actors. That has to be the same guy. So he was charged with receiving or interstate transportation of CP. That is crazy. So yeah, I guess that just proves once a pedophile, always a pedophile.
This man very nearly got away with murder until he decided to strike again. It was the 15th of July 2010 and Norma Lopez was just a normal 17-year-old girl. She was a hard-working girl who loved dancing and fashion. She was attending summer school at Valley View High in California. On the day in question, she left her final class of the day and went to meet friends. She usually walked from school with her boyfriend, but on this occasion she was alone. She was on her way to her friend's house near the school. When she never turned up though, her friends were concerned. They decided to see if they could meet her on the way and they walked her route across the field towards the school. It was there that they made a worrying discovery. Norma's bag, a school binder and a broken earring were lying on the floor. Norma, though, was nowhere to be seen. They called police and a search began, but no luck. 5 days later, it was announced that there was a $35,000 reward for information leading to Norma's return. Tragically, this didn't help, and just a few hours later, Norma's body was discovered. She was found deceased just over 2 miles away from where she had vanished. She was found with no clothes on from the waist up, and her death was determined a homicide, but her cause of death was not determined. The hunt was on to find her killer, but it would actually take a year before a breakthrough. In the meantime, police tested DNA that they found on Norma's earring, and it had no matches. That was until September 2011 when a match came through following a man being arrested on an unrelated charge. This was 42-year-old Jesse Perez Torres. They also found that his DNA was all over Norma's clothes too. He was arrested for the kidnap and murder of Norma. At his trial, it was revealed that he had randomly encountered the girl on her solo walk. He had been reportedly angry about his wife leaving him during that time. An anonymous woman also testified that he had attacked her too, dragging her into his car at knife point and R-ing her. He was found guilty and was given the death penalty.
What? Look at there, mate. Look at there. What? Look at there. Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. At least that's what a lot of people think. Today we're going to take a look at some of the evidence that may refute the official story. And you can decide for yourself what you think about this whole thing, but let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty crazy. If you want me to do a whole series about Jeffrey Epstein, his life and his crimes, let me know in the comments section below, but today we're talking about his death. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested when he was leaving his private jet, and a little bit over a month later, he was found dead in his jail cell. When Epstein was arrested, this was absolutely national news. Everybody was talking about it. It was such a crazy story because he had so many powerful connections. He had been really good friends with the President of the United States at the time, tech moguls, and loads of other celebrities and politicians from across the planet. So everybody in prison knew that this guy needed to be guarded, right? I mean, he was literally the most high-profile prisoner in America. So this is where the story starts to get a little strange. So according to various prison psychologists that had talked to Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison, he said that he didn't want to take his own life. Many times he expressed to these people that he didn't like pain, he was a coward, it was against his religion, and that he would literally never do that to himself. And I know that it is possible that he was manipulating people into thinking that he wouldn't do it just so that he could do it, but it is interesting that he was talking about this all the time. So the mistakes surrounding Epstein's arrest and eventual death started right away. On a prison intake form, he was listed as a black inmate, obviously he was white, and it also stated that he had no prior sex offense convictions, even though he was a registered sex offender. Like I said, this is the most high-profile inmate in America, so why would they make these mistakes? There were also multiple phone calls placed by Jeffrey Epstein that were not logged and not recorded by the prison system. They have no real record of who he called or who he talked to, and that is obviously a blatant violation of any prison's policy. For the entire month that he was held in prison, all the psychologists agreed that he may have seemed a little down, but he didn't seem like he was about to take his own life. On the night that Epstein took his own life, he made a social phone call. This phone call was not recorded, it was not logged, like I said, as prison policy states that it should be. And later on, the unit manager asked who Epstein had called, and he said his own mother, which didn't make sense because Epstein's mom died in 2004. In reality, that phone call was placed to his girlfriend at the time, Karina, who was a dentist from New York. There are 3 people that have knowledge of this phone call. None of them have stated that Epstein gave any indication that he was about to take his life. And it's interesting because the New York Times asked the Bureau of Prisons for Epstein's phone logs from prison, and they released them, but that phone call was not on the logs. After this, Epstein was escorted back into his cell at 7:49 p.m. by a guard named Tova Noel. And it was at this point in the night when the story takes a turn, and all of the controversy really begins. I'm going to cover all the stuff that surrounds his actual death in the next part of this TikTok series, so follow me if you want to hear like the stuff from his jail cell that's inconsistent with the official story.
This is the story of Stephanie Hamill. Stephanie, a 20-year-old travel agent from Wakefield, West Yorkshire, had her whole life ahead of her. She was engaged to the love of her life, James Garland, and was looking forward to a really bright future. Steph and James had met at school when they were just 13 and 15, proper childhood sweethearts. By the ages of 18 and 20, they'd moved into their first place together in Wakefield, and 6 months later, James asked Steph to marry him. By summer 2003, Steph had started shopping for a wedding dress with her mum Jane. The big white wedding was all she could talk about. She was so excited to marry the love of her life. Unfortunately, the couple never got to set a date for their wedding. On November 29th, 2003, the couple had enjoyed a night out together in Wakefield city centre. As the pubs and bars of Westgate were closing, and after grabbing a takeaway, the couple were going to walk home, but instead decided to try and flag down a taxi. Stephanie had been walking slightly ahead of James as the pavement was narrow, and they soon saw headlights coming towards them. Stephanie stuck out her arm, and a black Mercedes pulled up just ahead of her. As it had stopped, Stephanie assumed the car was a taxi and started to climb into the back seat. Just as James was approaching the car, the driver put his foot on the accelerator and sped right past James. Stephanie's leg was still hanging out of the back door, and James could hear her desperately screaming his name. The driver of the car was 29-year-old Ioannis Revnikiotis. He'd previously sexually assaulted a pregnant woman, and just an hour before picking up Stephanie, he'd also tried to lure 2 other girls into his taxi. When they told him to get lost, he'd carried on driving, looking for his next victim. James managed to flag down a police van, and between his distraught sobs, he managed to tell them that Steph had been taken. They drove James home to see if Steph had turned up there, but as they pulled up to the house and saw it was still in darkness, a voice came over the radio and told them that someone had been found in the road just 2 miles away. Stephanie had been found on the outskirts of Wakefield, lying in the middle of the road. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Stephanie had feared for her life as Revnikiotis drove her towards the countryside. She'd managed to get the door open, falling from the car, and being hit by an oncoming vehicle. That vehicle didn't stop and dragged Stephanie down the road before fleeing the scene. It was 2 years of living in absolute limbo for Stephanie's family before Revnikiotis was tracked down. His car was found in a scrapyard in Greece and he was arrested. It was another 2 years before he was charged, but in 2007 the jury found him guilty of Stephanie's kidnap and manslaughter, and he was sentenced to 11 years. The driver of the car that hit Stephanie and failed to stop was Mohammed Ashik. He was given a 200-hour community punishment order and banned from driving for 18 months. At the trial of Revnikiotis, and as the verdict was read, Stephanie's family could be seen punching the air in the gallery. They said nothing could bring Stephanie back, but they took some small comfort in knowing he'd been jailed.
Did this mum save her children from a horrific attack, or was she a cold-blooded killer? It was the evening of the 13th of December 2001. Tracy Roberts was at home with her 3 children in Iowa. She would later tell police of the horrors of that evening. She said 2 men broke into her house while she was bathing her 1-year-old daughter. At this point, her husband was apparently out of town. She told police that she ran to her son Bert's room and gave him the baby before being pulled back. She said one of the intruders choked her until she became unconscious. Now, Bert apparently stayed in the bedroom guarding his 2 younger siblings and arming himself with a baseball bat. A short time later, when Tracy realised she had regained consciousness, she ran to her bedroom and apparently grabbed a weapon from a safe. She then fired her weapon at one of the men, causing him to collapse onto the bathroom floor. The other intruder apparently escaped. Now, Tracy's 11-year-old son, Bert Pittman, backed up his mum's story, but there were doubts. Investigators found Tracy's neighbour, 20-year-old Dustin Wade, dead in the home and began to analyse the scene. Interestingly, he'd been shot 9 times with 2 different guns. Tracy explained this by stating that her and her children were trying to get out of the house after she had shot the man, and they saw the person on the floor move, so she shot him again. She said in the frenzy and the panic, she'd grabbed a different weapon to do so. She then said when she found out the intruder was Dustin, she was devastated. She knew Dustin's family, and her husband Michael actually had apparently grown quite close with him. Police started looking into finding intruder number 2, who had seemingly got away, but with no luck. They then started to wonder if he even existed. Interestingly, nothing of value had been stolen from the house. The only thing that was found was an old computer, which had carefully been placed into Dustin's car, which was on the drive. A paramedic also stated that the marks found on Tracy's neck did not match with strangulation and seemed to be self-inflicted. Tracy's ex-husband John was looked into as the pair were in the middle of a custody battle. To police, she painted a picture of an abusive ex who she alleged SA'd her son Bert. He denied this and claimed that Tracy was the one who was abusive to him and that she'd even threatened him once with a gun. Then investigators turned their attention to Tracy's husband Michael. As I said, he'd had a close relationship with Dustin, but apparently had been physically abusive to Bert. He allegedly even broke his nose once during an argument. Michael denied this, but he did have a history of violence. He was arrested in December 2000 after an argument with Tracy. Tracy accused him of pushing her to the floor and making her hit her head. Michael claimed that Tracy once got him drunk and tried to suffocate him with a bag. Following all the accusations and counter-accusations, the pair divorced. The case went cold and Tracy moved to Nebraska with her children. Now, Dustin's mum remained incredibly frustrated about her son's death. To her, it didn't make any sense. Dustin considered Tracy a friend, and he also hadn't armed himself with any type of weapon going into the house. He'd also just kind of casually parked his car on the front drive. His mum's concern grew when she found out that he actually had been shot into the back of the head 4 times. This indicated that the shooting was not self-defense. The case was reopened in 2008 and there were more troubling revelations. The house hadn't been particularly dishevelled and there were inconsistencies in Tracy's story. Many who knew her described her as manipulative and aggressive. Then there was the discovery of a notebook in Dustin's car. Dustin had seemingly written a strange tale about being contacted by John, who was Tracy's ex-husband. In the notebook it said that John wanted Dustin to kill Tracy. However, there was something strange about this tale in the notebook. It gave very specific details about John that Dustin would never have known on his own. Investigators started to wonder whether Tracy had fed Dustin this information to write in the notebook on the night he was killed. They noticed that the language that was used in the notebook was almost identical to the language Tracy used to describe John. She was arrested and charged with Dustin's murder. It later came out that Tracy had asked Dustin to come to the house on his own sometimes to do paperwork for her. Police believed that maybe Tracy was just trying to use Dustin in order to frame her ex-husband and therefore win the custody battle. Tracy was eventually sentenced to life in prison. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 PM and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.